Michael watched his wife step back from his congratulatory kiss, her expression shifting from celebration to something harder. "Not here. People might think I need a man's validation," she declared loudly enough for nearby colleagues to hear. Time seemed to slow as the weight of her rejection crashed through him. The promotion party continued around them, but something fundamental had just shattered between them. In that moment, he saw not just this rejection, but a pattern stretching back months, subtle dismissals, small public distancings, a growing gap between their public and private selves. His first instinct was anger, a reactive humiliation to match his own. But beneath that, a quieter voice asked, "What happens when support is rejected as weakness? And what kind of strength would it take to respond with dignity rather than destruction?" Michael hummed softly as he arranged the sliced strawberries over the chocolate mousse, Elaine's favorite dessert, the perfect finale to the salmon dinner warming in the oven. 8 years of marriage had taught him her culinary preferences with precision. The kitchen was filled with aromas of fresh herbs and buttery garlic, a sensory celebration of her upcoming promotion. From the adjacent home office came the rapid clicking of a keyboard. Elaine had promised to finish work by 7. It was now 8:30. "Almost done?" he called, keeping his tone light. 20 more minutes," she replied, without looking up, the blue glow of her laptop screen reflecting off her glasses. "This presentation for tomorrow's executive meeting needs to be perfect." Michael glanced at the dining table he'd set with their wedding china, rarely used these days, and the bottle of champagne chilling in ice. A slight adjustment was needed to straighten a wedding photo on the credenza, now partially hidden behind stacks of Elaine's work folders. "Remember when we had that picnic at Crescent Lake?" he asked, hoping to draw her into shared memory. "Right after you got your first management position?" She responded vaguely. "Was that before or after the Williams acquisition?" "Before," he said, smiling, despite the disappointment settling in his chest. "You were worried about leading a team, and we made that list of your strengths on a napkin." That finally earned him a glance and a brief smile. "You've always been my biggest cheerleader. And tomorrow I'll be cheering the loudest when they announce your directorship," he promised. "I'm so proud of you, Elaine." Her smile warmed slightly. "Thanks. Let me just finish this section." Michael nodded, turning back to the dinner preparations. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow, at her promotion party, they would reconnect in celebration. Scene 2. The public rejection. The corporate event space gleamed with tasteful elegance. Ambient lighting, champagne flutes on trays carried by circulating servers, and strategic spotlights illuminating the small stage where Elaine now stood. Michael watched from the front row, chest swelling with genuine pride as she delivered her acceptance speech with poise and confidence. "And I look forward to leading the Eastern Division with the same commitment to excellence that has defined my career thus far," she concluded. Applause filled the room. Elaine's smile was radiant, professional, perfect. As her division head stepped back after the handshake and photo opportunity, Michael rose from his seat, moving toward the small stairs at the side of the stage. This was her moment, yes, but they had always shared their triumphs. 8 years of partnership, of building her career together through late nights, relocated homes, and sacrificed vacations. He stepped onto the stage, approaching with a warm smile. Elaine turned toward him, but something shifted in her expression, a momentary flash of alarm, quickly masked by professional composure. As he leaned in for a congratulatory kiss, she took a definitive step backward. "Not here." Her voice carried more than she perhaps intended. "People might think I need a man's validation." The words landed like a physical blow. Several nearby executives glanced over, expressions ranging from uncomfortable to curious. A camera flash went off, capturing the moment. Something broke inside Michael, a dam of small dismissals suddenly giving way. Before he fully realized what he was doing, he had stepped to the DJ's table and lifted the microphone. "Attention, everyone," he said, his voice steady despite the thundering of his heart. "My wife doesn't need a man's validation, and I don't need a wife's disrespect. She's officially promoted to single." A shocked silence fell, followed by scattered applause that gradually grew stronger. Michael caught expressions of sympathy, surprise, and, most surprisingly, approval from several of Elaine's colleagues. Elaine stood frozen, color draining from her face. He replaced the microphone and walked off the stage, moving through the crowd with as much dignity as he could muster, avoiding eye contact but feeling the weight of dozens of stares. Behind him, someone attempted to restart the celebration, but the atmosphere had irreversibly changed. Scene 3. The silent aftermath. The silence in their separate cars was deafening. Michael gripped the steering wheel, watching Elaine's taillights ahead of him on the darkened streets. They hadn't spoken a word as they left the venue separately, she pausing only to make apologies to her supervisor, he stopping only to accept a supportive hand on his shoulder from a colleague he barely knew. Their home, usually a sanctuary, felt like unfamiliar territory as they moved through it, orbiting each other without connection. The carefully prepared bedroom, with its fresh linens and subtle lighting he'd arranged that morning in anticipation of celebration, now seemed like an artifact from another life. "You humiliated me," Elaine finally said, standing in the bathroom doorway, still in her formal dress, but with her professional makeup half removed. "In front of everyone who matters in my career." Michael sat on the edge of the bed, loosening his tie. "And what would you call what you did to me?" "That's different. It was a professional setting. And I'm just supposed to be invisible." "The supportive husband who exists only in private?" The words emerged more calmly than he felt. "This isn't the first time, Elaine." She looked away, focusing on removing an earring. "You're overreacting. The holiday party last December, you introduced me to your new team as your +1. The regional conference in March, you conveniently failed to mention we're married during that panel discussion. Tonight was just the most public version." "Those situations were different," she insisted, but her voice had lost some certainty. "Are you ashamed of being married to me?" he asked quietly. "Don't be ridiculous," she snapped, turning away to enter the bathroom. The door closed, not quite all the way, neither a complete separation nor an invitation to continue. Michael changed into sleep clothes mechanically, mind replaying not just tonight's rejection, but the pattern that had been building for months, perhaps years. When had her career success begun, requiring his invisibility? When had her professional identity started erasing their marriage? Later, in the darkness, he lay awake listening to Elaine's measured breathing beside him. The space between them in their king-sized bed might as well have been miles. Tomorrow would bring conversations or continued silence, confrontation or avoidance. But tonight, in the quiet aftermath of public humiliation, Michael faced a truth he'd been avoiding for too long. Something fundamental had broken between them, and pretending otherwise was no longer possible. Morning light filtered through the blinds as Michael sat at Elaine's desk, staring at her professional biography on the company website. He hadn't planned to search through her things, but sleeplessness had driven him from their bed at dawn, and the laptop she'd left open had drawn him like a compass to true north. Now, the words on the screen confirmed what his heart had already known. Elaine Matthews, newly appointed Eastern Division Director, brings 15 years of strategic leadership experience to this role. The biography continued for 3 paragraphs, detailing her education, career accomplishments, professional organizations, with no mention of her marriage, not even the customary lives with her husband that typically closed such corporate profiles. His fingers moved almost without conscious direction, opening her email, finding correspondence with HR about updating her personnel file. There it was, a request to change her emergency contact from Michael Matthews, husband, to simply Michael Matthews. He opened her social media profiles. Her LinkedIn showed no relationship status. Her rarely used Facebook, once proudly displaying married to Michael Matthews, now showed nothing at all about personal life. The digital erasure was systematic and deliberate. The phone rang, startling him. Their friend Thomas, calling to check in after last night. "How are you holding up?" Thomas asked. "Did you know?" Michael countered, voice rougher than intended. "That she's been removing me from her professional life?" A hesitation. "I noticed at the regional conference. She introduced herself using her maiden name during the panel discussion." The wedding ring on the bathroom counter caught Michael's eye, left behind as Elaine rushed to damage control meetings with her superiors. The platinum band gleamed accusingly in the morning light. "I need to talk with her," Michael said finally. "Tonight." "Good luck," Thomas replied. "For what it's worth, I think you deserve better." Michael ended the call, resolve hardening into certainty. The evidence was undeniable. Now he needed to hear her explanation face to face. Scene 2, failed conversation. The kitchen gleamed with evening light, neutral territory for the conversation ahead. Michael had chosen it deliberately, not their bedroom where intimacy might cloud judgment, not her home office where professional identity dominated, just the kitchen table where they'd shared thousands of meals over 8 years of marriage. He heard her key in the door at precisely 6:30, earlier than usual. At least she recognized the importance of this discussion. "We need to talk about what happened yesterday," Michael said as she entered, his voice deliberately calm. Elaine set down her briefcase, her posture already defensive. "I spent all day in damage control meetings because of your little stunt." "My stunt? You publicly rejected me, Elaine, like I was some stranger invading your personal space." She moved to the refrigerator, creating physical distance between them. "You don't understand the dynamics at play. As the first female division director, I have to be twice as independent, twice as strong." "And being married makes you weak?" Michael leaned forward. "I've found evidence all over that you've been systematically erasing our marriage from your professional life. You went through my things?" Her tone sharpened as she pulled out her phone, checking notifications even in this crucial moment. "I saw your company bio, your social profiles, the emergency contact change." Elaine sighed, finally sitting across from him, but maintaining distance across the broad oak table. "Look, women in leadership positions are judged differently. If I'm seen as someone's wife first, it undermines my authority." "No one said wife first. But pretending I don't exist, removing your wedding ring for work events, that's not independence, Elaine. That's erasure. You're overreacting. This is about my career, not our marriage. How can you separate them so completely? I've supported every promotion, every relocation, every late night. I've been your partner in building this career." "That's exactly the problem." She leaned forward intensely. "I need to be seen as having achieved this on my own merit." "So I'm a liability?" The words tasted bitter. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at it automatically. "I need to take this." "Of course you do." Michael stood, resignation settling into his bones. "We're not finished discussing this." But Elaine was already walking toward her home office, phone to her ear, the conversation effectively terminated without resolution. Michael remained at the kitchen table, hands flat against the cool surface, recognizing that this went deeper than one incident. This was about fundamental values, about what marriage meant to each of them. And for the first time, he wondered if their definitions were irreconcilably different. Scene 3. The Dinner Crisis. Saturday evening transformed their dining room into a showcase of carefully cultivated hospitality. Crystal glasses caught the light from candles Michael had arranged at Elaine's request. The table setting was impeccable. He'd seen to that, despite his misgivings about hosting colleagues so soon after their conflict. "Elizabeth and Robert, this is my partner, Michael." Elaine's introduction hung in the air as she gestured toward him at the door. Partner, not husband. Michael felt the slight like a paper cut, seemingly small but stinging sharply. "Lovely home you have," Elizabeth commented, handing him a bottle of wine. "Thank you." "We've been here 5 years now," Michael replied, deliberately emphasizing the we. "Michael's a consultant in educational program development," Elaine added quickly, steering the conversation away from their shared life. He noticed what was missing from the room only halfway through dinner. The wedding photos usually displayed on the sideboard had been removed. In their place stood Elaine's industry awards and a neutral piece of artwork. "Michael was just telling me about his approach to curriculum design," Robert said, seeming genuinely interested. "Oh, that's just a small project he's working on," Elaine interjected before Michael could respond. "Let me tell you about the restructuring plan we're implementing next quarter." Michael watched her physically shift in her chair, angling away from him as she commanded the conversation. When the topic turned to weekend plans, and Elizabeth asked directly about their anniversary trip Michael had mentioned, Elaine smoothly redirected. "Speaking of travel, how was your conference in Denver last month?" The evening continued in this vein, Michael being subtly diminished, their marriage deliberately obscured, his contributions minimized. He maintained his composure, serving dessert with practiced hospitality, but inside a quiet certainty was forming. This wasn't a momentary lapse at a high-pressure event. This was who they had become. After the last guest departed, they stood in the dining room, the remains of the dinner party between them. Elaine began stacking plates with efficient movements. "You did it again," Michael said quietly. "Partner, not husband." "It's just semantics." "It's not, and you know it." He picked up a wine glass, examining it rather than meeting her eyes. "You removed our wedding photos." "I didn't want to bring our personal life into a professional dinner. This is our home, Elaine. Our marriage isn't something to hide away when convenient." She didn't respond, continuing to clear the table in silence. The distance between them, though they stood mere feet apart, seemed to expand with every passing moment. Michael realized with sudden clarity that what hurt most wasn't the specific incidents, but what they revealed, a fundamental devaluing of their partnership, a willingness to sacrifice their connection for professional appearance. The question now wasn't whether he'd noticed the pattern, but what he would do about it. The living room was bathed in the soft amber glow of table lamps, creating a gentle intimacy that had been absent from their home for days. Michael sat on the couch, thumbing through bills without really seeing them, when Elaine appeared in the doorway. She hesitated, then walked over and sat beside him, not touching, but closer than they'd been since the promotion party disaster. "I've been thinking about what you said," she began, her voice missing its usual professional edge. Michael set the papers aside, cautious hope flickering. After nearly a week of strained silence, and parallel lives inhabiting the same space, any conversation felt like progress. "About hiding our marriage," she continued. "I never meant to hurt you. It's just, you don't know what it's like for women in executive positions. Every relationship becomes ammunition for someone to question your commitment, your focus. I understand professional challenges, Elaine. What I don't understand is why being married to me undermines your credibility." She sighed, pulling an old photo album from the shelf beside them and placing it between them like a bridge. "Remember our first apartment? That awful green couch we found on the sidewalk?" Despite himself, Michael smiled. "The one with the mysterious stain we covered with a throw blanket. You believed in me even then, when I was just a junior manager with big dreams." Her fingers brushed his as she turned the page. "I've been insensitive. The promotion and all the pressure. I got caught up in projecting the right image. I've always been proud of you, Elaine. I just need to know I'm not something you're ashamed of." She looked up, meeting his eyes directly for the first time in days. "You're not? I'm sorry about what happened." "About all of it." Michael felt the knot in his chest loosen slightly. "So where do we go from here?" "I was thinking about that bed and breakfast in Oceanside, the one we stayed at after our wedding. We could go this weekend, reconnect away from all this." "I'd like that," he said, surprised by the sudden moisture in his eyes. Elaine's hand found his, tentative but warm. "Me too." As she leaned slightly against his shoulder, Michael allowed himself to hope. Perhaps they could find their way back to what they'd once been. Perhaps she truly understood what had been broken between them. Scene 2. Reconnection. Weekend morning sunlight spilled across the antique four-poster bed, catching the auburn highlights in Elaine's hair as she slept. Michael watched her, chest rising with affection he'd feared might be gone forever. The seaside bed and breakfast was exactly as they remembered. Weathered wood floors that creaked with history, windows that framed the Atlantic's endless blue, and a quiet that city life never permitted. Their first night had been tentative but sweet, rediscovering physical connection after emotional distance. Over dinner, they'd talked more openly than they had in months, reminiscing about their early years together before career ambitions had complicated everything. Elaine stirred, her eyes opening to find him watching her. Instead of her usual morning rush to check emails, she smiled and stretched lazily. "What time is it?" "Almost 9. We slept in." First time in ages." She reached for his hand. "Let's walk on the beach before breakfast." The shore was cool under their bare feet, waves lapping at their ankles as they walked hand in hand. Gulls circled overhead, their cries mingling with the rhythmic rush of surf. "I forget how much I need this," Elaine said, stopping to watch the horizon, time away from the constant pressure. "We used to be better at balancing," Michael replied. "We can be again." She turned to face him, sand shifting beneath her feet. "I've been thinking about what you said about my career versus our marriage. You're right. I've been compartmentalizing them like they're in opposition. And they don't have to be." "No, they don't." She squeezed his hand. "I promise to do better, Michael. To stop hiding you away like some inconvenient truth." They spent the afternoon building an elaborate sandcastle, laughing as sections collapsed and rebuilding them together. It felt like the early years of their marriage, collaborative, joyful, connected. When the tide began rising, threatening their creation, they stood back to watch the waves reclaim it bit by bit. "Nothing lasts forever," Michael mused. "But we can rebuild," Elaine replied, leaning against his shoulder. Driving home Sunday evening, Michael felt a cautious optimism. The weekend hadn't erased their problems, but it had reminded them of what was worth fighting for. Elaine had even suggested hosting another dinner for her colleagues. The right way this time. It felt like a beginning, again. Scene 3. The Deeper Betrayal. The waterfront grill hummed with the quiet conversation of business dinners and the subtle clink of expensive stemware. 2 weeks after their reconciliation weekend, Michael sat beside Elaine at a corner table, awaiting the arrival of potential clients she'd been courting for months. The restaurant overlooked the harbor, city lights reflecting in dark water. "They're here," Elaine murmured, rising from her seat. Michael stood as well, reaching for her hand as the maitre d' led a distinguished couple toward their table. At the last moment, Elaine's fingers slipped from his, a subtle but deliberate withdrawal as she stepped forward with a professional smile. "Charles, Margaret, so wonderful to finally meet in person." Introductions were made. Michael noted the careful way Elaine avoided any language that defined their relationship. The practiced redirection when Charles asked how long they'd been together. It was a master class in evasion, all while maintaining perfect professional charm. Throughout dinner, Michael watched the pattern play out with increasing clarity. When he contributed to the conversation about international markets, a topic he was well versed in, Elaine subtly steered the discussion elsewhere. When Margaret asked about their home, Elaine spoke as though it were exclusively hers. The wedding ring Michael had been relieved to see back on her finger twisted anxiously beneath the table, a nervous tell he recognized from years of partnership. "Excuse me," Elaine said after the dessert course, rising with her phone. "I need to take this call." As she walked toward the restaurant entrance, Michael engaged the clients in conversation, maintaining the professional facade while his heart sank. When he glanced toward the door several minutes later, he saw Elaine still on her phone, laughing with an ease that had been absent all evening. Curiosity drew him to excuse himself briefly. As he approached, her words became clear. "I know, right?" she was saying, voice light with amusement. "Some men just need constant validation. It's exhausting having to manage their feelings while closing major deals." She hadn't seen him. Didn't know he was standing close enough to hear her dismissal of everything they'd discussed, everything they'd supposedly reconnected over during their weekend away. Michael retreated silently, returning to the table with a composure that cost him dearly. When Elaine rejoined them, her professional mask was firmly in place, giving no indication of her true thoughts. The drive home was silent, a vast emptiness stretching between them in the confines of the car. All the words of the weekend, all the promises, all the shared vulnerability, they dissolved in the acid truth of that overheard conversation. It wasn't that Elaine couldn't balance professional identity with their marriage. It was that she didn't want to. The weekend hadn't been reconciliation, but rather a temporary appeasement, a Band-Aid over a wound that required surgery. As the car glided through darkened streets, Michael stared out the window, facing a truth more painful than the original rejection. False hope was crueler than no hope at all. Michael rubbed his tired eyes as he sat in the home office, scrolling through Elaine's shared calendar to coordinate schedules for the coming month. After the dinner fiasco, he'd been withdrawn, processing his disappointment while maintaining the civility of two people sharing a house, but not much else. Despite everything, their 8th anniversary was approaching, perhaps a chance to rebuild if anything remained worth salvaging. The cursor hovered over the date he'd mentally reserved for months, May 17th, their wedding day, the day he'd planned to surprise her with a weekend at the mountain resort where they'd spent their honeymoon. There it was, the date blocked in red. Eastern Division Strategic Retreat, mandatory, Boston. A 3-day conference scheduled directly over their anniversary. Michael's breath caught. She couldn't have forgotten. He pulled out his desk drawer, retrieving the printed confirmation for the anniversary reservation he'd made 2 months earlier. The resort had required full payment in advance due to their exclusivity. He heard the front door open, Elaine arriving home from work. With the confirmation in hand, he walked to the kitchen where she was sorting through mail. "Did you know our anniversary is next weekend?" he asked, voice carefully neutral. She glanced up, momentary confusion crossing her face. "Is it? I've been so focused on this division retreat. You scheduled a work event over our anniversary." "It wasn't intentional, Michael. These dates were set by corporate." She returned to the mail, dismissive. "We can celebrate the weekend after." "I made reservations," he said, placing the confirmation on the counter between them. 2 months ago, at Ridgeline Lodge, where we honeymooned." She finally looked at the paper, then back at him with a flicker of genuine regret that quickly hardened into defensiveness. "I can't miss this retreat. It's my first major leadership event since the promotion." "You didn't even remember our anniversary, did you?" "Of course I did. I've just been overwhelmed with—" "Stop!" The word came out sharper than he intended. "Please don't lie to me on top of everything else." Elaine sighed, impatience edging her voice. "What do you want me to say? That I should jeopardize my career for a symbolic date? We can celebrate any time." Michael picked up the confirmation, crumpling it slowly in his fist. "It's not about the date, Elaine. It's about what it represents, what matters to you, what doesn't. That's not fair, isn't it?" He dropped the crumpled paper into the trash. "I think it's the clearest picture of our marriage I've seen in years." Without waiting for her response, he turned and walked upstairs. In their bedroom, he pulled a duffel bag from the closet and began methodically packing essentials. Not leaving, not yet, but creating the space he suddenly realized he desperately needed. The guest room had never felt like a destination before. Now it felt like a refuge. Scene 2. Separation begins. The guest room dresser drawer slid open with a slight resistance, as if reluctant to accept this new reality. Michael carefully arranged his socks and underwear, establishing order in the midst of emotional chaos. 3 days had passed since the anniversary revelation. 3 days of sleeping separately, of brief, functional conversations about household matters, of a marriage existing in name but little else. He set a framed photo on the nightstand, not of their wedding, but of himself at the summit of Mount Rainier, a solo hiking trip from before they'd met. A reminder of his capability, his independence. Beside it, he placed the small jade plant from their bedroom, its resilient leaves a quiet symbol of life, continuing despite adverse conditions. A soft knock at the open door interrupted his thoughts. "The Hendersons invited us to dinner Saturday," Elaine said, hovering at the threshold of what had become his territory. "I have plans." He didn't, but the thought of pretending through another social evening was unbearable. "Michael, people are starting to notice." Her voice lowered. "Thomas asked me directly if we're having problems." "And what did you tell him?" He continued organizing the space, not meeting her eyes. "That we're going through a rough patch, but working on it." He paused, looking at her directly. "Are we?" She crossed her arms defensively. "I'm trying to give you space. I understand you're upset about the anniversary. This isn't about the anniversary. It's about years of me supporting your career while you systematically erase me from your life." "That's a dramatic interpretation." "Is it?" He gestured to the guest room. "Would we be here if it weren't true?" Elaine's professional composure wavered. "What do you want from me, Michael?" "I used to know exactly what I wanted. Now I'm not sure there's anything you can give that would be genuine." She leaned against the doorframe, suddenly looking tired. So that's it. 8 years of marriage and you're just giving up? I'm not giving up. I'm giving myself space to figure out what I actually need. He turned back to his unpacking, a clear dismissal. You should probably call the Hendersons and make your excuses, or go without me. You're good at that. After she left, Michael sat on the edge of the unfamiliar bed, the quiet of the room both comforting and disorienting. For so long, his identity had been entwined with hers, the supportive husband, the behind-the-scenes partner in her success. Now, in this separated space, he was beginning to rediscover himself as an individual with legitimate needs and boundaries. His phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. Checking in. You okay? The simple question carried the weight of true friendship. Someone had noticed his absence, his pain. Someone cared about Michael the person, not just Michael the accessory to Elaine's life. Not really, he typed back. But I will be. It was the first completely honest thing he'd said in weeks. Scene 3. The Crossroads Reflection. Morning sunlight dappled the park bench where Michael sat, watching Saturday joggers and families with strollers navigate the winding paths. This neighborhood park had been his thinking spot for years, its familiar landscape a backdrop for many decisions. The job change 4 years ago, the decision to relocate for Elaine's promotion, countless smaller crossroads. Today's question felt weightier than all those combined. An elderly couple walked hand in hand along the path before him, matching their paces with the practiced synchronicity of decades together. The woman laughed at something her husband said, leaning slightly into his shoulder with easy affection. Michael watched them, a complicated ache building in his chest. That had been the vision, growing old together, supporting each other through life's challenges, celebrating each success as a shared victory. When had that vision begun to fade? When had Elaine's successes become hers alone, his support becoming invisible even to her? A forking path stretched before him, both literally in the park layout and metaphorically in his life choices. One direction led toward continued effort to save a marriage that increasingly seemed one-sided. The other toward the terrifying but potentially liberating prospect of reclaiming his individual identity. I always thought marriage was about compromise, he murmured to himself, watching a squirrel dart across the path. But I've been the only one compromising. The realization settled in his chest with surprising clarity. For years, he'd minimized his own needs in service of their relationship. Her career aspirations. He told himself it was love, partnership, support. But healthy partnership required mutuality, and that had vanished incrementally, so gradually he'd barely noticed its disappearance until the foundation had completely eroded. A young family passed by, parents flanking a toddler learning to walk. Both adults were fully engaged, equally supporting the child's wobbly steps. Michael watched them, recognizing the balance that had been missing in his own relationship, the mutual investment, the shared priority. He stood, stretching muscles stiff from sitting too long in contemplation. The path choices remained before him, but his vision had clarified. This wasn't about punishing Elaine or forcing her to change. It was about honoring his own worth enough to require basic respect. About recognizing that love without respect wasn't love at all, but codependence masquerading as devotion. Before making any permanent decisions, though, he needed perspective from someone who understood the specific challenges Elaine faced, someone who had navigated similar waters without sacrificing authentic relationship. The idea had been forming for days, and now it crystallized into clear intention. He would talk to Janet Wilson, Elaine's mentor, and the most successful female executive in her company. A woman who had reached the pinnacle of her career while maintaining a reputation for authentic leadership and a 30-year marriage. If anyone could help him understand whether this gulf was bridgeable, it would be Janet. The ridgeline trail stretched before Michael, a winding path ascending through morning mist toward the distant summit. He adjusted his backpack straps, water bottle secure in the side pocket, trail map tucked away, but memorized. This hike had been on his weekend list for months, always postponed for Elaine's work events or social obligations. Today he answered only to himself. The first mile passed in a rhythm of exertion and breathing, his mind gradually quieting from the chaos of recent weeks. With each step upward, the weight on his shoulders seemed to shift from burden to strength. Sweat dampened his shirt, despite the cool morning air, as he pushed past the initial moderate incline to steeper terrain. At the first lookout point, he paused, taking a long drink of water while surveying the landscape below. The town lay partially obscured by lingering fog, buildings and streets emerging like islands in a white sea. Somehow, seeing his problems from elevation made them both smaller and clearer. "I've been afraid of appearing controlling," he murmured to himself, the realization surfacing with sudden clarity. "So I've controlled nothing, not even my own boundaries." The trail grew more challenging as he continued upward, requiring concentration on footing and balance. There was something purifying about this physical demand, this commitment to a clear goal. Unlike the murky, emotional terrain of his marriage, here the path was marked, the destination certain. Another mile higher, the air grew sharper, the fog thinning around him. A second lookout offered an expanded view, more of the valley visible now, the pattern of neighborhoods and commercial districts taking shape through dissipating mist. His perspective was literally expanding with his altitude. "Supporting someone doesn't mean disappearing for them," he said aloud, startling a nearby chickadee. "Boundaries aren't walls, they're foundations." The final ascent required scrambling over rock formations, using both hands and feet to navigate the path. Michael welcomed the challenge, the total focus it demanded. When he finally reached the summit, the remaining fog lay far below, sunshine warming his face in the clear mountain air. He stood at the highest point, arms outstretched, filling his lungs with crisp clarity. From here, everything seemed possible. Not easy, but possible. The path down would eventually lead back to the complexities awaiting resolution, but he would return different from the man who began the climb. As he sat on a sun-warmed rock to eat the apple and protein bar from his pack, his phone regained signal. A notification appeared, a text from Janet Wilson, Elaine's mentor. "Michael, I've been meaning to reach out. Are you free for coffee tomorrow?" The timing felt almost cosmically aligned. He replied immediately, arranging to meet her the following day. Whatever guidance the mountain had begun, perhaps Janet could help complete. Scene 2. The Mentor's Wisdom. The cafe Janet had suggested was tucked away on a quiet side street, far from Elaine's corporate headquarters and the busy downtown lunch spots frequented by her colleagues. Michael arrived early, selecting a corner table that offered both privacy and a view of the small courtyard garden outside. Janet Wilson entered precisely on time, her silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in a simple but elegant style. At 62, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had nothing left to prove, yet continued to excel through genuine passion for her work. She spotted Michael immediately, approaching with a warm smile. "I've noticed something concerning about how Elaine presents her personal life," she said without preamble after they'd ordered coffee. "Or rather, how she doesn't present it at all." Michael's eyebrows rose, surprised by her directness. I didn't realize it was noticeable to others. "I've been where she is," Janet replied, her voice gentle but firm. 25 years ago, I was convinced that acknowledging my marriage would undermine my authority in the boardroom. What changed? Reality checked my assumptions. She stirred her coffee thoughtfully. "My husband reached his limit, much like I suspect you have. He helped me see that I wasn't just hurting him. I was hurting myself by compartmentalizing my life so severely." Michael leaned forward. "Elaine believes that being seen as someone's wife diminishes her professional standing. A common fear, but ultimately a false one." Janet reached into her bag, removing her phone and pulling up a photo. She turned it toward Michael, a professional shot of her receiving an industry leadership award, her husband standing proudly beside her. This was the turning point in my career, not despite acknowledging my partnership, but partially because of it. "I don't understand." "Authenticity," Janet said simply. "The strongest leaders aren't those who pretend to be something they're not. And they're those who integrate all aspects of themselves into a cohesive whole." Michael studied the photo, noting the natural ease between Janet and her husband, the visible respect in their body language. "It took work," she continued, seeming to read his thoughts. "And honesty. Frank had to be willing to tell me some hard truths, and I had to be willing to hear them." "Elaine hasn't been willing to hear much lately." Janet nodded, her expression softening. "She's trapped in the same fear I was, that acknowledging interdependence somehow signals weakness. The irony is that pretending to be completely self-sufficient actually weakened me as a leader." "How did you and Frank work through it?" He presented it as a matter of integrity, not as a personal demand. Her wedding ring caught the light as she gestured. "He helped me see that compartmentalizing was actually compromising my authentic leadership. That true strength includes the ability to acknowledge our connections, not despite them." Michael felt something shift inside him. Validation, yes, but also a new perspective on how to approach this conflict. "Do you think Elaine can change?" he asked, voicing his deepest fear. "That depends on whether she values your marriage enough to examine her assumptions," Janet replied honestly. "But I do know this. The approach matters. This can't be about making demands or creating ultimatums. It needs to be about inviting integration and authenticity." As Janet shared specific communication strategies that had worked in her own marriage, Michael felt the first genuine hope he'd experienced in weeks. Not certainty that their marriage would survive, but clarity about how to address the core issues with both strength and love. Scene 3. Strategy Formation. The library's private study room offered the perfect combination of neutral space and focused environment. Michael spread his notebook on the small desk, drawing a line down the center of a blank page. At the top, in deliberate block letters, he wrote, "Partnership needs." Janet's words echoed in his mind as he began listing his core requirements for a healthy relationship. Not preferences or wishes, but fundamental needs: mutual respect, acknowledgement of their marriage in all contexts, shared decision-making on major life choices, valuing their relationship alongside career priorities. On the opposite column, he began drafting the language he would use to express these needs. His first attempts felt accusatory. "You've consistently erased me from your professional life." He crossed these out, replacing them with I statements that Janet had recommended. "I need to be acknowledged as your husband in all contexts for our relationship to feel respected." The process was clarifying. This wasn't about forcing Elaine to choose between career and marriage, a false dichotomy he now recognized. It was about creating space for both to coexist with integrity. His phone rang, Thomas calling to check in, as he'd been doing regularly since Michael moved to the guest room. "How's the mountain man?" Thomas asked, his familiar voice grounding. "Better," Michael replied, surprised to find it true. "I met with Janet Wilson yesterday." Elaine's mentor? Bold move. She was surprisingly helpful. Went through something similar in her own marriage. "So, what's your plan now? The silent treatment can't go on forever." Michael glanced down at his notes. "I'm preparing for a real conversation. Not accusations or ultimatums, but clear boundaries about what I need in this relationship. And if she can't meet those needs?" The question hung in the air, unavoidable. "Then at least I'll know I tried everything possible." They discussed specific approaches, Thomas playing devil's advocate to help Michael refine his communication strategy. By the time they ended the call, Michael had a clearer roadmap for the challenging conversation ahead. He returned to his notes, practicing phrases aloud, testing how they sounded. "I believe in your career success and in our marriage. I don't think they need to be in opposition." The words felt right, balanced, honest, direct without being harsh. After 2 hours of preparation, Michael closed his notebook and took several deep, centering breaths. The anxiety that had been his constant companion for weeks had transformed into something steadier. Not confidence exactly, but resolve. Whatever the outcome, he would approach this conversation with the dignity of someone who knew his own worth. He pulled out his phone and composed a text to Elaine. "We need to talk, not about blame, but about our future. Tomorrow evening, 7 p.m.? The 3 dots appeared almost immediately, followed by her reply. "I'll be there." Michael closed his eyes briefly, centering himself in the quiet room. The path ahead remained challenging, but for the first time in months, he walked toward it with clarity rather than confusion, strength rather than suffering. Whether this conversation would begin healing or closure, he would face it as his authentic self. Michael moved the coffee table aside, creating an open space in the center of the living room. He positioned 2 armchairs facing each other, close enough for connection, yet with sufficient space for emotional breathing room. No physical barriers between them, unlike the kitchen table that had separated them during previous attempts at communication. The evening light filtered through partially open blinds, casting soft, golden streaks across the hardwood floor. He'd deliberately chosen this time, not so late that fatigue would cloud judgment, not so early that work preoccupations would linger. This conversation deserved its own sacred hours. He placed a small tray with a teapot and 2 cups on the side table, chamomile for its calming properties. The usual background noise, television, music, phones, had been silenced. Only the gentle hum of evening cicadas through the open window provided accompaniment, fresh air circulating like the possibility of new beginnings. Michael checked his reflection in the hallway mirror, straightening his shirt, not formally dressed, but intentionally put together. This wasn't casual conversation. It deserved dignity and presentation. His notes from the library session remained in his pocket, not to be read verbatim, but present as silent support. When the front door opened at precisely 7, he took a deep breath, centering himself in the moment. Elaine entered, her work attire exchanged for casual clothes, though her professional armor remained visible in her posture. "I made tea," he said simply, gesturing toward the chairs. Elaine paused, taking in the deliberate arrangement of the room. Something in her expression shifted, perhaps recognition of the care he'd taken, perhaps wariness about what lay ahead. "This looks ceremonial," she observed, setting down her purse. "Important conversations deserve intention," he replied. Thank you for coming." A flicker of surprise crossed her face at his gratitude. She moved toward one of the chairs, hesitating before sitting. "So what is this about exactly?" Michael poured tea for both of them, the familiar ritual steadying his hands. "It's about us, about whether there still is an us worth fighting for." Elaine's eyes widened slightly as she accepted the cup. She sat, her back straight, legs crossed, the posture she adopted in board meetings. Michael took his seat opposite her, leaning forward slightly, present and engaged. The evening stretched before them like uncharted territory, filled with both possibility and peril. Scene 2. Truth and resistance. "I've realized there's a pattern in our marriage that's hurting us both," Michael began, his voice calm but direct. The hours of preparation had distilled his thoughts to their essence, removing accusation while preserving truth. Elaine's fingers tightened around her teacup. "If this is about my career again, it's about our partnership," he corrected gently, "and how it's become increasingly one-sided. That's not fair. We've both made sacrifices." Michael nodded, acknowledging her perspective without yielding his own. "I've supported your career moves, relocations, late nights, weekend work. I've been your champion, Elaine. But somewhere along the way, you stopped being mine." He outlined specific examples: the strategic erasure of their marriage from her professional life, the progressive diminishment of his role, the pattern of prioritizing professional image over relationship truth. Not as accusations, but as observations, delivered with the clarity of someone stating weather conditions rather than assigning blame. "Those are isolated incidents," she countered, shifting in her chair. "You're connecting dots that aren't related." "They create a clear pattern," he replied steadily. "One where our marriage exists only in private, and even then it takes second place to career concerns." Elaine set her cup down with controlled precision. "You don't understand the scrutiny women in leadership positions face. Every personal detail becomes ammunition for someone to question your commitment." "I do understand that challenge. What I don't understand is why acknowledging your marriage makes you professionally vulnerable." "Because it does." Her voice sharpened with frustration. "Because the moment I'm seen as someone's wife, I become diminished in their eyes." "That's a perception, not necessarily reality," Michael said, maintaining his center despite her rising defensiveness. "And it assumes that being connected somehow makes you less than whole." The family photo on the wall seemed to watch their exchange, a happier time when their partnership had felt equal and authentic. Michael glanced at it briefly before continuing. "I've come to understand that my need for acknowledgement and respect isn't unreasonable," he said. "It's fundamental to any healthy relationship." "So what are you saying? That I have to choose between my career and our marriage?" Her eyes flashed with the familiar indignation that had shut down previous conversations. "No, that's a false dichotomy." Michael leaned forward slightly. "I had an interesting conversation with Janet Wilson this week." Elaine's expression froze. "Janet? My mentor Janet? She reached out to me, actually. She noticed the same pattern I've been experiencing." "You discussed our private issues with my colleague?" Her voice rose with incredulity. "She shared something important, that she went through a similar phase in her own marriage. That she once believed professional success required compartmentalizing her personal life." "That's different. Janet's already established. I'm still fighting for recognition." Her perspective was that integration actually strengthened her leadership, not weakened it. Michael kept his tone conversational, not weaponizing Janet's insights, but offering them as perspective. That authentic leadership includes acknowledging all aspects of your life, not hiding them. Elaine fell silent, her usual counter-arguments momentarily disrupted by this unexpected source of wisdom. I don't want you to choose between career and marriage, Michael continued into the silence. I want us to find a way for both to exist with integrity. Scene 3. The first crack. Wait, Janet said that to you? Elaine's voice had lost its defensive edge, genuine surprise breaking through her professional facade. The conversation had continued for almost an hour, circling through arguments and counter-arguments, but this revelation seemed to penetrate where logic had failed. She did. She said that pretending to be entirely self-sufficient actually undermined her authentic leadership. Michael watched carefully as something shifted in Elaine's expression. That acknowledging interdependence became a strength, not a weakness. Elaine stood abruptly, moving to the window. The room had darkened while they talked, the golden evening light fading to soft blue dusk. When she spoke again, her voice had changed, vulnerability seeping through the cracks of her composure. My mother gave up everything for my father's career, she said quietly, her back still turned to him. Her education, her ambitions, her identity. By the time I was 10, she was just Frank's wife. Nothing more. Michael remained silent, recognizing the precious gift of this revelation. I swore I would never disappear like that, she continued. Never become an appendage to someone else's life. Is that what you think I want? For you to disappear into my identity? She turned slightly, her profile visible in the fading light. No, not consciously. But I've seen how it happens, gradually, invisibly, until one day you wake up and don't recognize yourself. Elaine, he said gently, there's a vast difference between being erased by someone else and pretending you don't have connections at all. She turned fully toward him then, and he was startled to see moisture in her eyes, the first genuine tears he'd witnessed in longer than he could remember. I don't know how to do this, she admitted, the words seeming to surprise even her. How to be both, a leader and a partner. I've only seen examples of women who chose one or the other. Except Janet, Michael offered quietly. Except Janet, she acknowledged, returning slowly to her chair. The distance between them had decreased, not just physically, but emotionally. I didn't know about her struggle. She always seemed so effortlessly integrated. That's the thing about integration. Once achieved, it looks natural. Michael passed her a tissue from the side table. But it takes intentional work to get there. Elaine accepted it, their fingers briefly touching. I'm not sure I know how to change patterns this deep. Neither do I, Michael admitted. But I know I'm willing to try if you are. She looked at him directly, the professional mask completely fallen away. I do love you, Michael. That's never been the question. I know. But love without respect isn't enough. He hesitated, then added, and I think we're both tired. Maybe we should continue this tomorrow, when we're fresher. She nodded, a small but significant acknowledgement that this conversation deserved continuation. Tomorrow, then. As she rose to leave the room, Michael remained seated, giving her space to process. The evening hadn't provided a complete resolution, but the first genuine crack had appeared in the walls between them, a fissure that might, with care and courage, widen into a pathway back to each other. Morning light streamed through the kitchen windows, casting a gentle glow over the breakfast nook. Michael stood at the counter, whisking eggs in a bowl, when Elaine appeared in the doorway. She was still in her pajamas, hair loosely pulled back, a vulnerability in her appearance that matched the unguarded expression on her face. I never told you about watching my mother give up her identity, she said without preamble, moving to the coffee maker. Michael paused mid-whisk, recognizing the gift of this opening. Last night's conversation had cracked a door. Now Elaine was choosing to step through it. "Tell me now," he said softly, resuming his preparation but giving her his full attention. Elaine measured coffee grounds, her movements precise. She was brilliant, had a master's degree in economics when most women didn't even attend college. But when she married my father, his career became the priority. Was that their agreement? Not explicitly. It happened in increments. Elaine leaned against the counter, watching him cook. First, she turned down a promotion because it would have meant my father commuting farther. Then she started introducing herself as Frank's wife at faculty events. By the time I was a teenager, she was planning her entire life around his schedule, his needs, his career. Michael nodded, recognizing echoes of his own family. My father expected my mother to drop everything whenever his work demanded it. I swore I'd never be that kind of husband. And I swore I'd never disappear the way she did. Elaine moved closer, unconsciously reducing the physical distance between them. But I overcorrected, didn't I? Instead of finding balance, I went to the opposite extreme. They worked together, seamlessly preparing breakfast as they had hundreds of times before. Michael cooking eggs, Elaine toasting bread, a choreography of long familiarity. "I think we both brought our family patterns into this marriage," Michael observed, sliding eggs onto plates. "My tendency to accommodate, your fear of losing yourself." Elaine nodded, setting a blue mug before him, his favorite, with the handle that had broken last year and that she had carefully glued back together. The repair was visible but solid. "The irony is," she said, sitting across from him, "in trying to avoid becoming my mother, I've been diminishing you the way my father diminished her. And I've been enabling it, the way she enabled him." They ate in contemplative silence for a moment, digesting this understanding along with their breakfast. "So where do we go from here?" Elaine finally asked, echoing his question from their first tentative reconciliation attempt, but this time with genuine openness. "We create something new," Michael replied, "something that honors both your career and our partnership. I have some ideas about how to start." Scene 2. Building new patterns. The home office had always been primarily Elaine's domain, Michael using it only when she was away. Now they stood together before the large wall calendar, colorful markers in hand, deliberately creating shared space in both their physical environment and their future plans. "Red for your work commitments," Michael said, uncapping a marker. "Blue for mine, and green for us, date nights, weekends away, important anniversaries." Elaine smiled, taking the green marker. "Starting with our makeup anniversary trip next month." She wrote Ridgeline Lodge anniversary across the dates he'd originally booked, now rescheduled. "And your industry conference the week before," Michael added in red, their hands occasionally brushing as they populated the calendar with the next 3 months of commitments. They moved around the office, making small but significant changes. Michael brought in a comfortable reading chair from the living room. Elaine cleared half the desk for his laptop and materials. Together, they rehung the wedding photo that had been removed before the dinner party, placing it prominently on the wall. "About the Anderson presentation next week," Elaine said, referring to the important clients they'd dined with before. "I'd like you to attend with me." Michael raised an eyebrow. "As your husband, or as your partner?" A flicker of old defensiveness crossed her face, then dissolved into a rueful smile. "As my husband, my incredibly supportive husband who happens to know international markets better than anyone else on my team." "I think I can manage that," he replied with a gentle teasing that felt both familiar and new. They spent the afternoon reorganizing the space, discussing practical strategies for their new approach, when to use her maiden name professionally and when to use their shared surname. How Michael would introduce himself at work functions, ways to acknowledge their marriage without making it the focus of professional interactions. It's not going to be perfect right away, Elaine admitted, arranging his reference books beside hers on the shelf. I've spent years creating these patterns. They won't change overnight. I don't expect perfection, Michael assured her, just genuine effort and honest communication when it's difficult. She turned to face him, the afternoon light casting her in warmth. I can promise that, and something else too. When I slip back into old patterns, which I probably will, I want you to call me on it. Not publicly, but don't let it slide either. I can do that, he agreed, realizing how far they'd come from the couple who had stood on opposite sides of a kitchen table, worlds apart despite their physical proximity. A moment of shared humor lightened the practical planning as Elaine attempted to spell prioritization on their new shared whiteboard and made a mess of it. Their laughter, the first genuine shared mirth in months, felt like rain after drought. Scene 3. Public integration. The conference hall hummed with the professional energy of hundreds of industry leaders gathered for the annual finance summit. Michael sat in the second row, program open to the page listing Elaine's presentation. Strategic Market Integration, Breaking Down Silos for Comprehensive Growth. On stage, Elaine stood at the podium, commanding the room with the confidence that had first attracted him years ago. Her presentation was crisp, authoritative, thoroughly professional, and yet subtly different from her previous speaking engagements. There was an authenticity to her presence that seemed to resonate with the audience. Before I open for questions, she said, as her conclusion approached, I want to acknowledge my husband Michael, whose insights on international market integration were invaluable in developing this framework. The acknowledgement was brief, natural, neither overemphasized nor minimized, just a simple truth stated with comfortable confidence. Michael felt a quiet pride that had nothing to do with public recognition and everything to do with the journey they'd traveled together over the past month. At the reception afterward, they navigated the room with a newfound synchronicity. Elaine introduced him appropriately to colleagues, neither hiding their relationship nor making it the centerpiece of professional conversations. Michael engaged substantively on topics within his expertise while supporting her leadership role. The Anderson deal closed yesterday, Elaine mentioned to a colleague, her hand finding Michael's naturally as they stood in conversation. Michael's analysis of their European exposure was crucial to structuring the final terms. Later, as they circulated among industry peers, Janet Wilson approached with a warm smile. "You two look well," she observed, the meaning clear in her knowing eyes. "We are," Elaine replied, meeting her mentor's gaze with genuine gratitude. "We've been doing some important integration work, personal and professional." "The most valuable kind," Janet affirmed, including Michael in her approving glance. "It shows. Authentic leadership always does." As the evening wound down, a senior executive who had known Elaine for years commented, "You seem different lately, Matthews. More present somehow." "I feel more present," she acknowledged. "More integrated." On the drive home, a comfortable silence enveloped them. Not the tense absence of communication that had once filled their car, but the peaceful quiet of two people secure in their connection. "That wasn't so hard," Elaine finally said, a note of surprise in her voice. "Which part?" "Being both, a respected professional and someone's wife, a leader and a partner." She glanced at him. "For years, I thought those identities were in conflict. But tonight, they actually seemed to strengthen each other. Michael reached across the console to take her hand. That's the victory, isn't it? Not that either of us won over the other, but that we found a way for both to win together. Elaine's fingers tightened around his. Partnership as strength, not weakness. Exactly. The city lights played across the windshield as they drove toward home. Their home, now truly shared again in all the ways that mattered. 2 years after that painful promotion party, Michael watched with genuine pride as Elaine accepted an industry leadership award. The grand ballroom was filled with the same colleagues who had witnessed their public rift, now witnessing something far more powerful, a relationship transformed through honesty, courage, and mutual respect. "I want to acknowledge my husband, Michael," Elaine said from the podium, her voice confident and warm. "Not just for his unwavering support, but for teaching me that true strength includes the ability to be connected. That leadership isn't about appearing completely self-sufficient, but about authentic integration of all parts of who we are." Their journey had taught them both valuable lessons. That boundaries preserve love rather than diminish it. That partnership enhances individual achievement rather than threatens it. And that patterns inherited from family can be recognized and reimagined rather than blindly repeated. The crisis that nearly ended their marriage had ultimately transformed it into something more authentic and resilient. Michael had learned to express his needs with clarity and conviction, while Elaine had discovered that acknowledging their relationship actually strengthened her professional standing through the authenticity it conveyed. Their experience had rippled outward, too. Several of Elaine's colleagues had approached them about navigating the delicate balance between career ambition and personal relationships. Janet had even invited them to co-lead a workshop on integrated leadership for emerging executives. As they left the ceremony hand in hand, both successful in their own right and genuinely supportive of each other, they embodied a truth more powerful than independence or dependence alone. Interdependence grounded in mutual respect and honor. The strength of true partnership wasn't in diminishing either person, but in creating something greater than either could achieve alone. A relationship where both individuals could flourish, grow, and shine their brightest light, not in spite of their connection, but because of it.